Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and welcome to the Hebrew Woman Show. I am your host, Renaissance Woman, aka Ren Judah, and we are going to pick up on the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I really want to get back to that. I've had so much stuff going on, and it has just been, some health struggles, and so it's been really hard for me to maintain trying to keep all the content together. But hopefully, we'll be making some strides towards that within the next 2 weeks, I'd say. So, in the meantime, we'll be hanging on by a wing and a prayer here. But I always want to at least come and do the Sabbath show. It's important to me because, this is my way of giving back and saying thank you to the Most High for allowing me to see another Sabbath. You know, we as we get ready to close out the Sabbath, I spent my day working on some things, doing some reading and prayer, and just resting, and really enjoyed the Sabbath. It's really nice outside today, and so that's what I did. Just resting. So I'm going to get to it. Let's get to our slides. So. The purpose of this channel is to explore our biblical principles. This is a show for women, by women, so that we can do that together and support one another and uplift one another in the word. The purpose of this channel is so that we can examine ourselves. 2 Corinthians 13:5 says, examine yourselves, whether ye be in the faith, prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves that how Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates. That is one of this. I use this slide every time I do the show because this is our guiding light. This is our founding principle here, is to examine ourselves. And so I say to you, um, I am definitely, sometimes I fall off, but I want to get back in the habit of making sure I get back on doing my daily logs. And that is where I take my personal inventory at the end of the day. I like to see, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? What can I do better? And especially when in terms of what we're talking about here is leadership. As a leader, I mean, how are you showing up as a parent? How are you showing up as a friend, a mother, a father, or who, whatever your role is? How are you showing up in leadership? And so, taking that fierce moral inventory at the end of the day, it's important. So, examine yourselves, and that's basically what I spend time doing on the Sabbath. I'll sit, I'll read, I'll write, I think, and it gives me clarity and helps me to. And the whole point of it too is not to berate or belittle yourself or beat up on yourself. I know a lot of people tend to take that examining of yourself the wrong way, but correction is important. The Bible says that God corrects those who he loves, and I want to be loved. So I have to have the ability to receive correction. And that's at work, at home, at play. When you're wrong, you're just wrong. Or if you can do something better, you can just do it better. And there's always room for improvement. I strive to be a woman of Titus, and that's what our perspective here. This is why this slide shows up every stream as well, because I feel like it is important. It's an important goal for me, I will say, because I like the founding tenets here that we are to speak things that become sound doctrine, that the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, in charity, in patience. The aged women likewise, meaning all those things that were just listed, you need to do that, as well as we need that they be in behavior that becometh holiness, not false accusers, not giving too much wine, teachers of good things, that they teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their husbands, that the word of God not be blasphemed. And some people have a problem with the order, but the whole thing, God is a God of order. And there's a reason why that the obedient part is there, is because we are to be obedient to the Most High. And here you are on earth, and if first of all, when we're talking about leadership here, and this is why it's important to teach leadership young, so that your children, especially now, they choose their own spouses, that they know what to look for in a leader. When your daughters are now, they're choosing their own husbands. They need to know what leadership looks like. They need to understand that these qualities, these characteristics, these virtues, these are the behaviors that you are to look for in a husband. So you don't have to worry about, obey. You obey the rules of the road. You obey the laws of the country. You obey the rules at work, right? Well, then you want to, so you definitely want to obey the word of God. And if that says that the order is that the husband is the head of the wife, then we want to obey our husbands. And part of that is, if you feel like your husband doesn't have good judgment, then we need to talk about what measure we are using to find husbands, and how to teach young women how to find husbands that are leaders. So I think that's a whole different conversation. But this is the order. You know, there's a chain of command on your job. There's a chain of command in every level of leadership in the society. You can't have a society that doesn't have order. And there is a chain of command in that process, okay? We're here to train ourselves to think biblically, not emotionally. That is not to say that we don't use our emotions. Are tools. They're important tools to help us, to guide us, to help us understand what's going on around us. We feel things, right? That's not a bad thing. However, if our decisions that we make are guided by emotions that are not healthy or that are not good for us, or if we're being overly emotional, we're not exercising sound judgment. So what measure do we use to determine if something is sound? We use the Bible. We use the Bible as our scale, as our meter. We also, again, come together to help support one another, uplift each other, share wisdom, and provide wise counsel to one another. Proverbs 11:14 says, where no counsel is, the people fall, but in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. So that means, my sisters, you want to surround yourself with women who are wise. You want to surround yourself with women who are pressing towards the same mark that you are, who share your same virtues and values and beliefs. You want to surround yourself with decent, upright women who are doing their best to keep the word and walk with integrity, okay? Because there is safety in a multitude of counselors. So find yourself some wise women who believe and who are doing their best to keep the word. And that doesn't mean that you believe anything and everything somebody says. That's because they're saying they're a woman of God. And that goes for me too. Whatever, you judge a tree by the fruit it bears, right? 1 John 4:1 says, beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. There are a lot of people who are going to show up telling you they're this and they're that. I'm a leader. I'm a woman of God. I'm a man of God. I'm this, I'm that. And they are liars. And the only way you'll know that is in time, and by using discernment and judging and watching what they do rather than what they say. We are going to start the When Decency Disappears series this week. I am going to post some articles on the Hebrew Woman Show page. I will also more than likely post them on the Renaissance Woman page as well. And we'll do some follow-up conversations here about decency, respect, and how to decide basically about what's important to you, and picking and choosing your battles when you are in a disrespectful place, when you are in a place where people's behavior is not what it should be. How do you survive, right? Toxic work environments, toxic families, like a lot of people who celebrate these holidays, they have a lot of issues during those times of year. What can you do to protect yourself and your spirit when you are in environments where decency disappears? Okay. So we're going to talk about that because I think it's important. And for me, I would say, like, this week, here's a little homework for you. Take the time to write down what you think matters to you. What is important to you? What is your top 10? I mean, if you have a top 20, but write it down so you know. I think one of the reasons why sometimes we get so wound up about everything is because we haven't figured out what's a priority. So we just end up reacting to everything. So what's important to me? Like, so is this battle about someone, for example, being disrespectful to you at work? You're in a position of leadership. You're going to have people who are always going to be trying you, always trying to test your authority and your leadership. What battles are important enough to you to fight for? Decide what things can you ignore. And then we are talking about I was having a hostile work environment conversation with someone. They were talking about reasonable accommodations. And I was talking about, and I personally think that in our own lives, sometimes just as at work, when a person who has disabilities or health issues has to ask for reasonable accommodations, sometimes you have to ask for reasonable accommodations at home, at work, at play, wherever. And you have to make reasonable accommodations for yourself to maintain your sanity and to take care of yourself. So we're going to talk about all those things, okay? So let's get back to the law of navigation. And I got this law of navigation 2.0 because we're going back to revisit the law of navigation. I feel like it's important to go back through these. And if you'll remember, I stopped at law number 9 because I needed to go back, and because I am literally just going through so much. And these laws to me are really important virtues that I want to incorporate into my leadership. And so what that looks like is me actually just taking my time and examining these virtues and these laws and how they actually apply to my life and leadership. One thing I can tell you today, I just had a friend of mine, let me see if I can get the name of this book. She just shared with me that she's reading a book that someone gifted her. And I told her I would read it with her. And so I downloaded it on Everand, because that's what we listen to the audiobook on as well. But I actually downloaded the ebook for reading, but it's called The Book of Awakening. And I saw that Oprah had did a Super Soul Sunday interview with the guy that wrote the book. And I told her I would read it with her, and I got to. So I just read the foreword and the introduction by Jamie Lee Curtis. And I really thought it was interesting because the questions that she asked is like, at the end of your life, right? The 2 questions that you are going to ask, maybe, did I live well? Did I love well? I'm paraphrasing here. But so I thought about that too. Like, what do you look like your life daily? What, at the end of the day, what are your fierce moral inventory questions going to be for yourself? And then also, I read the first entry because it's kind of like a daily entry book, like a daily log, where you know how like you have those daily prayer books, things like that. And so for the first day, he was just talking about just being human, and how being human, we wake up as sentient beings in a way that no other entity on the planet does. And what does that mean for you? And so I'm just thinking about that. And so I'll probably write about that later and come up, share my thoughts about that. So anyway, if you want to read it, I would love to. I could post it on the Hebrew Woman Show or the Renaissance Woman. I'll do both. Post it on both pages, and then you could just drop comments on what, if you decided to just go in and start with the day, like today is the 14th, you might have decided to go ahead and go into March 14th, or you may, like me, just read the first entry. It's up to you. But that's an interesting book. So it's called The Book of Awakening, and his name is Mark Nepo, I guess it is. So I will be adding it to my book list. And I like that it's a daily reader, because we already have a daily reader, because we're reading the 21 most powerful minutes in a leader's day. So, I mean, your day's almost going to be packed with daily readers if I keep it up at this rate. Anyway, let's get to it. Let me share. Let me add the book to the stage. Here we go.
Leadership law number 4, the law of navigation. Anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. In 1911, 2 groups of explorers set off on an incredible mission. Though they had used different strategies and routes, the leaders of the teams had the very same goal: to be the first in history to reach the South Pole. Their stories are life and death illustrations of the law of navigation. One group was led by a Norwegian explorer, Roald Amundsen. Ironically, Amundsen had not originally intended to go to Antarctica. His desire was to be the first man to reach the North Pole. But when he learned that Robert Peary had beaten him there, Amundsen changed his goal and headed toward the other end of the earth, north or south. He knew his planning would pay off. Before his team ever set off, Amundsen had assessed the coming challenges and painstakingly planned his trip. He studied the methods of the indigenous Arctic people and other experienced cold weather travelers, and he determined that their best course of action would be to transport all their equipment and supplies by dog sled. When he assembled his team, he chose expert skiers and dog handlers. His strategy was simple. The dogs would do most of the work as the group traveled 15 to 20 miles in a 6-hour period each day. That would afford both the dogs and the men plenty of time for daily rest prior to their following day's travel. Amundsen's forethought and attention to detail was incredible. He located and stocked supply depots all along the intended route. That way, they would not have to carry every bit of their supplies with them on the whole trip. He also equipped his people with the best gear possible. Before he set off, Amundsen had taken the trip in his mind, carefully considering every possible aspect of the journey, thinking it through, and planning accordingly. And it paid off. The worst problem they experienced on their trip was an infected tooth one man needed to have extracted. The other team of people was led by Robert Falcon Scott, a British naval officer who had previously done some exploring in the Antarctic area. Scott's expedition was the antithesis of Amundsen's. Instead of using dog sleds, Scott decided to use motorized sledges and ponies. Their problems began when the motors in the sledges stopped working only 5 days into the trip. The ponies didn't fare well either in those frigid temperatures. When they reached the foot of the Transantarctic Mountains, all of the poor animals had to be killed. As a result, the team members themselves ended up hauling the 200-pound sledges. It was arduous work. Scott hadn't given enough attention to the team's other equipment either. Everyone on the team developed frostbite and became snowblind because of the inadequate clothing and goggles. The team was always low on food and water. The depots of supplies were inadequately stocked, too far apart, and poorly marked, making them very difficult to find. Because they were continually low on fuel to melt snow, everyone became dehydrated. Making things even worse was Scott's last-minute decision to take along a fifth man, even though they had prepared enough supplies for only 4. After covering a grueling 800 miles in 10 weeks, Scott's exhausted group finally arrived at the South Pole.
This story is always hard for me to listen to because even with the men that were following Scott, I was just like, why didn't you just stop? And I do think that there are times when you do have to be insubordinate, right? We don't follow dangerous or illegal orders, right? If your husband, for example, decides to all of a sudden, hey, we're doing this and it's against the biblical law, you're going to have to decline, And there are times where, especially if your life is in danger, where you can absolutely say no. And it just shows too, like, how the word says pride comes before the fall. They just kept going despite all the things. Like for me, when the snowmobiles went out, I would have been done. But and if let's just say for the sake of argument, okay, we're going off. For me, when the ponies died, it's like the canary in the coal mine. That should have been it. But just stubborn, and just like it just shows you how pride will definitely kill you. Like, is this literally the hill, or in this case, the mountain you want to die on?
On January the 17th, 1912, there they found the Norwegian flag flapping in the wind and a letter from Amundsen. The other well-led team had beaten them there by more than a month. Scott's expedition to the South Pole is a classic example of a leader who could not navigate for his people. But their trek back was even worse. Scott insisted they collect and carry back 30 pounds of geological specimens, more weight to be carried by worn-out men. The group's progress became slower and slower. One member of the party sank into a stupor and died. Another, suffering severe frostbite, purposely walked out into the blizzard to keep from hindering the group. Before he left the tent, he said, "I am just going outside. I may be some time." Scott and his final 2 team members made it only a little farther north before giving up. They died 150 miles from their base camp. We know their story only because they spent their last hours updating their diaries and writing letters. Some of the last words Scott wrote were, "We have been to the pole, and we shall die like gentlemen. I think this will show that the spirit of pluck and power to endure has not passed out of our race. We very nearly came through, and it's a pity to have missed it. But lately I have felt that we have overshot the mark." Scott had great courage, but only at the end did he recognize his shortcomings. Found he saw that anyone can steer a ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. Because he did not live by the law of navigation, he and his companions died by it. One thing all leaders have in common is the ability to see more and before. They see more than others do because they see the big picture, which not all people grasp. And they see what's coming before others do. This gives them an advantage when it comes to navigating for people that they lead. And today, with the rapid pace of life, that ability to see before others do is especially important so that they don't let their team get blindsided. The larger the organization someone leads, the more clearly the leader has to be able to see ahead. That's true because sheer size makes mid-course corrections more difficult. And if there are errors in navigation, many more people are affected than when a leader is traveling alone or with only a few people. The disaster of the Titanic was a good example of that kind of a problem. The crew could not see far enough ahead to avoid the iceberg altogether. And because of the size of the ship, they could not maneuver enough to change course once the object was in view. The result was that more than 1,000 people lost their lives. First-rate navigators always have in mind that people are depending on them and their ability to chart a good course. I read an observation by James A. Autry in Life and Work, A Manager's Search for Meaning, that illustrates this idea. He wrote that occasionally you hear about the crash of 4 military planes flying together in a formation. The reason for the loss of all 4 is this. When jet fighters fly in groups of 4, one pilot, the leader, designates where the team will fly. The other 3 planes fly on the leader's wing, adjusting to him and following wherever he goes. Whatever moves the leader makes, the rest of the team will make along with him. That's true whether he soars in the cloud or smashes into a mountaintop. Before good leaders take their people on a journey, they take steps to give the trip the best chance for success. Number 1, navigators keep their emotions from clouding their vision. Recently, I came across something that writer Professor C.S. Lewis wrote in 1948 because people were worried about dying as a result of the atomic bomb. It reminded me of the fear people experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Lewis wrote, "We think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we going to live in an atomic age?" I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century, when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and a premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances and in which death itself was not a chance at all.
I think that is so true. It makes me remember when the SARS epidemic was out. Everybody thought that we were going to end up with a global epidemic of SARS, and we didn't, not to that extent. But there are always going to be a myriad of ways that we can die, right? I think one of the things for me that is really important about the law of navigation is just like, where are you headed? Like when you look at your organization, when you look at your family, what direction do you want to go in? I think part of it is making sure that you and the people who you are traveling with are aligned and on the same road. One of the toughest things I think for a lot of organizations is that you may have a mission statement, but everybody that is part of the team, which of course, personally, we all are going to have our own agendas. But I think in terms of leadership, when Leadership is competing against itself, when it is undermining itself, when it is doing things to sabotage, when coworkers are doing things to sabotage each other, when there are other things going on outside of the mission. This is what derails the mission, right? I mean, because how can you go forward? How can two walk together unless they be agreed? And I think that is one of the toughest things about the law of navigation, is getting people who are willing to follow and being a person who can lead. And if you're a person who can lead and you behave, I think, in an ethical and upright manner, I don't care who they are. I think people will follow you. And I think what happens in your, whether your home or your place of work, as is a result of your leadership. If your workspace, if your house is chaotic, if it's hostile, if it's toxic, it is a direct result of your leadership. It starts at the top. It starts with you. It begins and ends with you, because you're the head.
But a certainty. This is the first point to be made and the first action to be taken. We're already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and a premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. No matter the conditions we face, leaders must not panic. They can't let the circumstances prevent them from seeing more and before, and from navigating people through their difficulties. Tom Morris, in his book Plato's Lemonade Stand, offers a metaphor that can help leaders avoid getting caught up in emotion that might otherwise paralyze them. Imagine life as a large wagon wheel, writes Morris. If we emotionally live on the outer rim, then as the wheel turns, we'll be spun around to extreme highs and lows in rapid and dizzying succession. But if we can learn to move closer toward the midpoint of the hub, we become much more centered. The wheel will still spin, but we won't be so dramatically thrown by its motion. That's a position of power. The best navigators are able to delay their emotions long enough to work through a problem when people are depending on them to lead. How can they do that? First, by knowing and staying true to their definition of success. For example, the definition of success that guides me internally states that success is having those closest to me love and respect me the most. This keeps me grounded and faithful. My external definition of success is knowing my purpose and growing to my potential and sowing seeds that benefit others. These two definitions give me perspective as I face challenges. The second factor that helps good navigators keep their heads in the midst of difficult circumstances is dedication to being bigger on the inside than the outside. This comes from having more faith than fear and from embracing good values. When facing difficult times, values keep us from losing our way or from giving up. Number 2, navigators draw on past experience. Every past success and failure that you've experienced can be a valuable source of information and wisdom if you allow it to be. While successes can teach you what you're capable of doing and give you confidence, failures often teach greater lessons. They reveal wrong assumptions, character flaws, errors in judgment, and poor working methods. Ironically, many people hate their failures so much that they quickly cover them up instead of analyzing them and learning from them. As I explained in my book, Failing Forward, if you fail to learn from your mistakes, you're going to fail again and again.
That's 2 Corinthians 13:5. Examine yourself. Know ye not your own selves? That has to be the first thing we do. In order to make it, we need to examine ourselves. And you just said it there.
What you're capable of doing and give you confidence, failures often teach greater lessons. They reveal wrong assumptions, character flaws, errors in judgment, and poor working methods. Ironically, many people hate their failures so much that they quickly cover them up instead of analyzing them and learning from them. As I explained in my book, Failing Forward, if you fail to learn from your mistakes, you're going to fail again and again. Why do I even mention something that seems so basic? Because most natural leaders are activists. They tend to look forward, not backward, make decisions, and move on. I know this because that is my tendency. But I'm not very good at navigating. It's one of my leadership weaknesses. Good navigators take time to reflect and learn from their experiences. I wrote about this in my book, How Successful People Think. But allow me to recount some advantages of reflective thinking. Reflective thinking gives you true perspective. Reflective thinking gives emotional integrity to your thought life. Reflective thinking increases your confidence in decision making. It also clarifies the big picture. And finally, reflective thinking takes a good experience and makes it a valuable experience. Each benefit gives a leader a great advantage when planning next steps for a team and for an organization. Number 3, navigators examine the conditions before committing. Drawing on experience means looking inward. Examining conditions means looking outward. No good leader plans a course of action without paying close attention to current conditions. That would be like setting sail against the tide or plotting a course into a hurricane. Good navigators look at the present and try to anticipate the future so that they can count the cost before making commitments for themselves and for their team. They examine not only measurable factors such as finances, resources, and talent, but also intangibles such as timing, morale, momentum, culture, and so on. I'll discuss this more in the laws of intuition and the laws of timing. Navigators, number 4, listen to others. No matter how much you learn from the past, it will never tell you all that you need to know about the present. No matter how good a leader you are, you will not see everything you need to. That's why top-notch navigators gather information from many sources. For example, before Roald Amundson's expedition to the South Pole, he learned from a group of Native Americans in Canada about warm clothing and Arctic survival techniques. The skills and practices met the difference between failure and success for his team in Antarctica. Navigating leaders get ideas from many sources. They listen to members of their leadership team. They talk to people in their organization to find out what's happening at the grassroots level. And they spend time with leaders from outside the organization who can mentor them. They always think in terms of relying on a team, not just themselves. Number 5, navigators balance both fact and faith. Being able to navigate for others requires a leader to possess a positive attitude. You've got to have faith that you can take your people all the way. If you can't confidently make the trip in your mind, you're not going to be able to take it in real life. On the other hand, you also have to be able to realistically deal with facts. You can't minimize obstacles or rationalize challenges and still navigate effectively. Pretending obstacles don't exist won't help you to overcome them. If you don't go in with your eyes wide open, you're going to be blindsided. Jim Collins confirmed the balance between faith and fact in his 2001 book, Good to Great. He calls it the Stockdale Paradox, after Admiral Jim Stockdale, and he writes, "You must retain faith that you will prevail in the end, and you also must confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. Balancing optimism and realism, intuition and planning, faith and fact can be very difficult, but that's what it takes to be effective as a navigating leader." I remember the first time I really understood the importance of the law of navigation. I was 28 years old, and I wanted to lead my organization through a difficult challenge unlike anything I'd ever done before. But I was aware of my shortcomings as a navigator. I took no joy in getting into logistical details, and I was very impatient. So to help me create a way forward in the navigation process, I developed a strategy that I have used repeatedly in my leadership. I wrote it as an acrostic based on plan ahead, so that I would also be able to remember it. The letter P stands for predetermine a course of action. The letter L, lay out your goals. The letter A, adjust your priorities, and then the letter N, notify key personnel. The letter A, allow time for acceptance, and the letter H, head into action. E, expect problems. A, always point to your successes, and then the letter D, daily review your plan. Leaders who are good navigators plan ahead. They see more and before others, and they prepare more and before. This enables them to find a way forward as well as convey confidence and gain trust from the people. Great leaders do all that, plus they make navigational adjustments, changing course when needed as they go along. More than once, Robert Falcon Scott could have made navigational adjustments that might have saved his team. When the motorized sledges failed, he could have turned back, when they realized the ponies couldn't make the trip into the mountains. Instead, he valued reaching the pole more than keeping his team alive. He demonstrated an inflexibility that prevented him from making good decisions. And in the end, it's not the size of the project that determines its acceptance, support, or success. It's the size of the leader. That's why I say that anyone can steer the ship, but it takes a leader to chart the course. For leaders to be at their best, they need to do all 21 laws well, but at the same time, nobody does all 21 well. Of all the laws, I'm probably the worst at the law of navigation. However, I'm fortunate to have someone leading my organization who is better at navigation than I am, Mark Cole. I was reminded of his ability to chart the course as the COVID-19 pandemic struck in the spring of 2020. In February 2020, Mark and I were in Israel leading tour groups of the Holy Land. When we were about a week and a half away from the end of the tour, we began hearing news about a potential pandemic on the horizon. Already in some countries, officials were talking about shutting down travel. We started to have concerns about getting everyone in our group home from Israel and getting home ourselves. But we also had another difficult leadership challenge to navigate. We were then 4 weeks away from holding our twice annual International Maxwell Certification event, our biggest conference of the year. More than 3,000 people from 64 nations had signed up and were scheduled to attend. We needed to figure out whether to hold the conference or cancel it. But there was a lot on the line. If we canceled the conference, we would lose millions of dollars. We had already given money to the hotel in Orlando where we hold the conference, and we would also be responsible to pay for a huge block of rooms, whether or not they were used. Plus, we had a deadline in a few days to pay an additional $1 million for food. We had a decision to make. We could plow ahead and hold the conference. Everything in the United States was still open for business. The airlines were flying, and we could tell everyone who had signed up to come. That would save us financially, but what would it do to the people who had signed up for the conference? Mark took ownership of navigating the company through these decisions. His values were his guiding principles. Our number one value is valuing people, Mark said. We were in Israel experiencing the stress of not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing if we would be able to get on planes to go home. I knew that the people signed up for the IMC were experiencing that same stress and doubt. We waited as long as we could to make the call because we wanted to see what would happen, said Mark. But in the end, we needed to do what was right for the people. We canceled the event in time for people to change their travel early enough to get their money back. The decision was difficult but clear. Mark said simply, sometimes it costs money to put people first. Mark did the right thing, and we were prepared to deal with the negative financial fallout. But then 2 weeks later, something happened. Walt Disney World closed and the hotels in Orlando shut down. Our company wasn't going to be responsible for rooms that could not be occupied. Mark used that opportunity to work with the hotel to renegotiate our deal with them for future IMC events. But we still had thousands of people anxious to be certified as Maxwell leadership coaches. What were we going to do about that? With the help of our staff, Mark navigated that too. They created a virtual event in August 2020, and we ended up training and certifying more than 6,000 coaches virtually. It was the largest training that we had ever held. Since then, Mark has developed a system in which we train as large a group as we can in person, according to the circumstances, while simultaneously providing virtual training to people not traveling to Orlando. It became a huge win for the coaches and for us. That's what good leaders do. They do more than steer the ship, they chart the course. When they practice the law of navigation, they create wins for people on their team, the organization, and everyone they serve. What could be better than that? As I was reading to you the law of navigation and thinking of this as probably the weakest area in my leadership, I began to feel a sense of gratitude for the people I have around me. I often teach that your team, the people that you have around you, they're not there to compete with you. They're really there to complete you, to complement you, to add value to you. And I thought about the people on my team that were good navigators, much, much better than me. And I thought of myself as a quarterback. You see, a quarterback, he really doesn't get paid to run the ball. Quarterback gets paid to get the ball to the person who has the greatest potential of succeeding.
That's funny. Just thinking, I'm really glad I went back and started over, because the law of navigation is one that is really important to me, because I'm always trying to figure out which way to go, how to chart the course. And I do have a knack for seeing things before they happen. So, but where, like, he's saying you're not going to have all of the qualities perfect, right? The execution a lot of times for me is where my problems come in. So I am one of my leadership reports says, I'm a futuristic thinker. I can see, I have insight, I have vision, I can see the long game. But a lot of times my problems come in at execution because I tend to be impetuous. So learning to slow down, and even in my case, it's either procrastination and overdrive, or it is not doing it at all. So just trying to find the right balance for me is where I struggle. And I think, in terms of leadership, on certain types, it depends on how your team is, how it exists, right? If you're a smart leader, you're going to take your people and you're going to use those qualities that they exhibit, like he's saying, better than he does. But what happens, I've found in a lot of organizations, is that leaders a lot of people today are so jealous and so envious of each other that they feel like they're competing with each other. If they have a member of their team that is really talented, instead of using those gifts and to make you look better because you're in charge, you already have the position. Why are you competing with your team? I just think that is one of the most asinine things that I see in leadership all the time. And I see it in household too. You have parents that compete with their children. Like, it just makes no sense. You should want to see a better version of you, right? But that's not what happens. People just they're not forward. A lot of people aren't forward thinking like that. So when you can be part of an organization where leadership is forward thinking like that, where they want to see the people around them excel, that is amazing. And so I would say even consider that in your friendships. If you have insight, you have great navigation, but in me, like, you need somebody to slow you down, look for people who have those qualities and surround yourself with people who are thoughtful, who take their time, and who are very patient. And sometimes, what they say, birds of a feather flock together. So, you be around people who exhibit the qualities that you want to embody and display. So that's the ticket for me.
So when that quarterback grabs that ball, his first thought is, I'm going to run. His first thought is, how do I get this ball to the person who has the greatest potential to succeed? In the law of navigating, I sit down with my team and I let them know very openly, honestly, that navigating isn't my strength. So who's going to be able to carry the ball? Who's going to be able to take ownership of it? And as a group, what we have discovered with incredible joy is that teamwork really does make the dream work. And what we've discovered is that when you let the team come together and you let them carry the weight, the load, have the vision, the responsibility of implementing their giftedness into the vision and the mission of the organization, then navigation becomes a great reality in your life. So I suggest you do what I do. Very simple. Look at the laws that you're not strong at, bring the group together, discover which ones are good, in this case at navigating, hand the ball off to them. And by the way, all great leaders I know, they don't always lead. Sometimes I get in line and I follow with the rest. It works really well. So the law of navigating, it's for mature people who realize and are self-aware that they can't do all the laws. And if this is one of them that they don't do well, pass it on to another person. Let them take ownership. And by the way, give them the credit. What I've discovered is when the team compliments me and completes me, and I point to them and thank them, especially publicly, they can hardly wait to pick up another load for me on another day.
And that's how you run a successful organization.
Leadership law number 5, the law of addition. Leaders add value by serving others.
Already 45 minutes in, and we'll pick up. I'll do my best to try to come back and pick up some more this week. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Sabbath. Shabbat shalom, everybody.